Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back this week of Torah. Today we're going to do the Kabbalah of the 10 plagues, the Eser Makos. And I learned something incredible in Sefer Or Gedalia by the great Rabbi Gedalia Shore years ago. And he said that the plagues were like fixing the what's called the Eser Maamarot, the 10 sayings or the 10 statements in the Torah. There's actually 10 Pesukim, 10 verses where Hashem speaks these Pesukim and he creates what's called the Maisa Bereshis. You know, everything, the world, the earth, the universe, all of us, everything in it. And what the Egyptians had done is the Egyptians had kind of corrupted these 10 mamaros, these 10 fundamental aspects of creation. And then one aspect of the plague, or the deep Kabbalah view of the plague, was that these makos, these plagues, were correcting and fixing what the Egyptians had corrupted. And then recently learning the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, in his Sefer Shaar Pesukim, he does it on the Parshas, deep Kabbalah look in the Parsha. And I finally learned that which of the Sephirot relates to which of the Makos, which of the plagues. So it's a very deep concept, a very deep subject. I'll try to give you guys a taste of it. We'll go through it a little bit. And I'm not sure, if I'm going to have it all perfect, but I think there's amazing deep connections that we can make here. Let me see if I can bring up let me see if I can share the screen here. See what we can do. Let me try to share this with you. And hopefully that's come up. And let's take a look at this. So let's move this out of the way here. Let's move this down. I'll move this here, if that helps. All right, so we're going to start with the first plague, the first, the Makkah, which is Dam, and Dam's blood. And it's related to the Sphira of Malchus. And this is the Mamar. So this is what Hashem spoke to bring on the creation. Now it's interesting. I recently I was trying to research information. I think there was some kind of Jewish Torah Substack, and someone had mentioned that the Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda Low from Prague, the famous Rabbi Low who may have created the Golem, that he in his Sefer Gevurot Hashem, he went through all this. He went through how each plague was related to which mamar, and it's really fascinating. One thing he did, I made this list years ago, but I really just went through the mamaros, the 10 mamaros. I just went straight from the beginning of the Torah, all in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what the Maharal did is he changed the order of how some of these appear in the Torah, and then connected them to certain plagues. So it's pretty interesting. I'm going to go by what he said in Gevurot Hashem today. So he said that the plague of blood, it relates to this mamar. And let me read it for you. It's Vayomer Elokim, Nasa Adam. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong page. Let me switch back to Adam. Okay, so he said it relates to this one. It relates to Vayomer Elokim. So Hine Nisati lechem es kol esav. Hashem says, like, I'm giving to you like all of like the herbs, everything, the green growing from the ground. They're zorea zera, that they create seeds. Asher al al penei chol haaretz, that are upon the face of all the earth. The es kol ha'etz asher bo pri eitz. And that, upon the face of the earth, and this is all of the trees which in it are or on it are they're pre-eights, they're fruit trees, they're trees that produce fruit. Zorea zara lechem yihya la'achla. And that these, will produce seeds, and they'll be for you for eating. All right, so that's that's a lot there. All right, so let's try to go through it a little bit. It's very interesting. So here, we're talking about where Hashem's created like the fruit trees and food, and it says it's la'achla for us, and it's basically what we need to have life, what we need to be sustained, what we need to live. And so too, mayim, water, and dam, blood, are crucial for life. And this all relates to Malchus. This called Malchus is the kingship. It's called the lower crown. It's the lowest of all the Sephiros. It relates to the planet Earth itself is Malchus. The Sephirot Malchus is the Earth, and everything growing from the Earth and all of life. So the Egyptians had kind of corrupted this. So what Hashem did is he changed the mayim, the water, and mayim, I don't think a person can live for more than 3 days if they don't have water, and he changed that to blood. And so he was symbolizing that they weren't learning the Torah, which is compared to the water, and they were just turning into blood. They just turned into bloodshed and death, and they weren't using it as the Torah is the Eitz Chaim, used for life, the tree of life, and they were using it in the wrong way. So he gave them the sign of this plague that he's changing it to blood. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Let's click over here. Okay, so the blood holds the lowest level of the soul, the nefesh. And that's why if a person, unfortunately, chas v'shalom, they lose too much blood, the nefesh will separate from the body and a person can't live. So both these things, blood and water, are crucial for life. So too is food. And here's the potential for food. Here is the mamar of like Hashem creating food and also creating life and seed. And this also relates to, in the Kabbalah, it relates to the feminine waters of a woman. And like if, through the, relations with her husband, and life can be created, fruit, children can be created. And they were, the Egyptians were disrupting all this. They didn't like how the Jewish people were miraculously expanding. So they were doing everything they could, all these decrees to separate the husband from their wives. And here it was the fix. And Hashem sends this first makkah of dam, of blood, and he changing the water to the blood. And their fix was like the Egyptians would actually have to pay Jewish people like money, and then the blood could be turned back into water. Okay. So the next, we step up here. Here, let me see if I can. The next step is going to be the Sephira of Yesod. So just as Malchus, we were talking about the feminine waters. In Kabbalistic sense, these are the male waters. Yesod is the male waters, or the male zera, the male seed, and this can create life. And Yesod is the amazing Sephira that brings all the ruchnius, all the spiritual from the higher spiritual worlds, and it brings it into the physical. And this is how, spiritual ideas can become physically, manifest in the world. And Yesod is related to the bris. It's related to the koach, the power that Hashem's given to a man to create life, to create children. So here it's interesting. So here it says, Vayomer Elokim, and let me read it with the Nakudos, Yishritzu Hamayim Sheretz. So he created like the waters to swarm with sheretz, and these could be reptiles, could be amphibians, could be speaking about fish. And they're a nefesh chaya. They have a soul. These animals have life to them. The of yofeif al aretz, and like all the birds that are flying upon the earth. Ve'al penei rakia, upon the face of the rakia shemayim, upon the face of the rakia of the heavens. And we'll get to that here. I think it's just talking about the sky. Rakia is separating between lower waters and higher waters. Here, I think the lowest level of the rakia, the Gemara says there's 7 rakiim, and the lowest, I believe, is called Vilon, and I think this could be referring to the atmosphere. So the birds are in that lowest level, the rakia, in the sky, in the atmosphere. And we see here life, we see life, all kinds of, reptiles, amphibian life, birds and fish, and here it's related to the Sephardim, the frogs. And it's obviously like frogs, they're swarming creatures in the water. And it's interesting because Chazal learns out something really fascinating from the frogs, that the frogs would throw themselves into the ovens of the Egyptians. And they learn out here the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, like chas v'shalom, someone has to die, to protect Hashem, in the name of Hashem for his holy Torah, and dies al Kiddush Hashem. This was learned out from the frogs, that even the frogs did this. And so I think it's like Hananya, Azariah, and Zachariah. I always forget. I apologize. I always forget their names. Hananya, Azariah, and Zachariah, maybe. The 3 Siddiqim who were in Babylon, and they were thrown into the fire, and they miraculously survived. And it's all related to Yesod. Yesod is associated with Yosef Atzadik, like the Shomer Bris, protecting a man, protecting the sanctity, the Kedushin Tahara of his reproductive power, and only using it in Kedushin, only using it in marriage, and only using it to bring life into the world. And the fix of this was the Egyptians. The Egyptians, once again, they were trying to break up, the relations between husbands and wives to bring children into the world. And they were yelling and barking orders at the Jewish people to do slave work for them. And so Hashem sent the frogs to croak at them and go all kinds of places, in their homes, on them, in them, everywhere, showing like the misuse of the Shomer Bris, like the Arayos, the misuse of that reproductive power for just, their own pleasure, not to bring children in the world. And the frogs were the fix. And it's interesting too, the Midrash says it starts with one really big giant frog, and then out of that frog, they started hitting it, and many, like a whole army of frogs came out. It's very fascinating. Okay, so then we will go to the next Makkah, the next Sephirot. So this is going to be the Makkah, the plague of Kinim, of lice. They were coming from the earth. And Hod is the Sephirah. It's on the side of Din, a judgment, or severity, and it's related to empathy. It means like if we can pull ourselves back. Gevurah, above it, is like self-control, strength, power, self-control. So here, if we have control to make room for others, then we can have empathy for other people. And the Kinim, so all this was the lack of empathy of the Egyptians, the lack of Karsa Tov. They didn't appreciate that, like Yosef Atzadik had, built, helped save Egypt from the famine by building all the storehouses. When the Pharaoh had the famous dream, the 7 healthy cows, 7 emaciated cows, 7 healthy, stalks of grain, and the 7 emaciated, wind-stricken stalks of grain. And Yosef saved all of Egypt, and they had no compassion with this. And here it's interesting. So the Maharal says that it's related to Vayomer Elokim. Let me read it here. Yikavu hamayim mitachas hashamayim, that all the water should be gathered into under the heavens. The water should all, and this is where the oceans were going to be in one space and making room for the land. El makom echad, to one place. The waters, the oceans will be gathered to one place. The seira'eh hayabasha, and then the dry land. Let the dry land appear. So Hashem is revealing the continents. At first, the first 2 days, I believe, the water was, the oceans were over, you had a sphere of oceans over the sphere of land. And then now Hashem pulls back the ocean and reveals like the continents, reveals the land, puts nice beach as like borders between the ocean and the land. And right in here, right, we see like the Kinim, the lice, they came from the land. There's probably extremely deep connections of this. I'm not exactly sure, but it was basically a lack of empathy for other people, and it led to like these lice, like just, jumping on them, and there's, the itching and the scratching and just the torment, and just showing like, the lack of empathy for other people. And the fix was the plague of the Kinim, the lice, and that was going to correct that problem. All right, so we move up to the next Makkah, and this is Arov. It's like an army of wild animals, and this is related to Netzach, the Sephir of Netzach. Netzach is it's very interesting. It's like defined as victory, eternity, and usually the aspect of Hashem's name that's associated with this is like the mighty armies of Hashem. Oh, by the way, so both these names of Hashem, so the name that appears or associated with the Sephirah of Netzach is Hashem Tzivakos, like Hashem, the master of legions, the Lord of the legions. So it's one army is here with Netzach, and then the other army is with Hod, where Hashem's name that's associated with that is Elokim Tzivakos, like an army of din and judgment. And so here, so the lice are like one army of din and judgment. And then here is like so you had the little army of the lice, very tiny creatures. Now here you have the mighty lions and bears. I think there's amazing midrashim and say even like the octopus would crawl out and like open up the doors and let all the lions and tigers and all the fierce, predatory animals, in Hashem's army of animals. So here it's interesting. So the Maharal what he associates with this one. Let's see. It's Vayomer Elokim Totze Haaretz, so that the Totze Haaretz, that the earth it should bring forth Nefesh Chaya Lamina, like you're right, a soul of like the wild animal to its type, Behema, Varemes, Bechaiso, so it should be like the domesticated animals, the creeping things, maybe the insects or the little creatures that crawl upon the ground, the wild animals, the Chaya, and then Vachaya Eretz Lamina and Vayichichen, and then it was so. So here, right, we see all the different types of animals, and then Hashem is using these animals as his army to attack. And I don't know specifically, I'd have to go back through the Midrashim exactly what it was punishing, but I think in some sense, right, just the behavior of acting more like an animal, like a nefesh behema, instead of like the elevated Tselem Elohim, instead of acting like a human being. And this was the correction. So the army of wild animals was the correction. All right, so now we're going to move up to Tiferes. And Tiferes is a balance between the Sefiros above it, between Chesed and Gevurah, between kindness and power, or strength, or self-control. And they balance into Tiferes, which is generally defined as beauty, or emes, or truth. And its embodiment, the embodiment of that spirit was Yaakov Avinu, Jacob. So here, Dever is interesting. When we think of a plague, so through most of history, besides the plagues that Hashem brought on Mitzrayim, brought on Egypt, when we think of a plague, we usually think of illness and sickness. And this is related to that. So it's sometimes Dever is defined as anthrax, but basically some illnesses only affect animals and don't affect humans. Like for instance, I think like recently with coronavirus, with COVID, it was originally maybe only in bats. And then I think unfortunately they were mucking around in a lab in like Wuhan and bio research, and they came up with ways to make it affect humans, and that was not good. So there, sometimes the Dever can go from animals like a swine flu. I think it originally started in pigs and swine, and then transmitted somehow to people, like avian flu. So I think of it, sometimes they can start out in animals, and then unfortunately, if we go to the next step, they can affect human beings. So this is illness. So this is maybe lower level illness, and this is Tiferes. So this is a very deep one. So we'll take a look at it a little here. So let me read the Mamar. So it's related to the Mamar of Vayomer Elokim Yehi Ma'oros Barakia Shemayim. This is very deep concept here. That Hashem saying, let there be in the Ma'oros, the great luminaries in the sky, generally like the sun and the moon, but also all the rest of the stars and the planets, all these bright shining spheres in the heavens, and they should lahavdil bein hayom uvein halayla, and they'll separate between the day and the night, meaning like the sun will have dominion over the day and it's daytime, and then the sun will set, and then Hashem brings up the moon, and the moon will have dominion over the night. V'haya la'osos, and they'll be for signs, ula moadim, and for your festivals, like we know when it's time for certain festivals, like for instance, Passover is on the 15th of the month, Sukkot is on the 15th of the month. When it's Rosh Chodesh, when it's the first of the month of Tishrei, we know it's Rosh Hashanah, and we know, like for instance, we can use when the sun sets and three stars come up, like the new day begins, the night, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, first it's evening, then it's day, and we use these to tell our festivals. The Jewish calendar is set. It's both calibrated to both the moon, the monthly cycle, and the solar cycle, the yearly cycle. So the holidays always come out in the right season and the right time. And then ule yamim vishanim, and they should be for your days and for your years. So Hashem's kind of created this cosmic clock in Shemayim, in the heavens, and by this cosmic clock, we can tell time. We really can tell time by how high the sun is in the sky during the day, and we can really tell time. We're not used to doing this, but it's this huge cosmic clock that's up there. And it's fascinating that Hashem placed all the planets and stars in their orbits on the fourth day, even though he created light on the first day, to show you that time began. Hashem created time on the first day, but then he set his cosmic clock according to the time that he created. So the sun and the moon weren't placed in their orbits until the fourth day, even though this 24-hour period of time already started on day one, which is pretty fascinating. So this is a very deep one. It's dever, which can also mean davar, can be like a thing or a word or speech. Davarim can be speaking. I think here the sun and the moon, they're commonly compared, like the sun is compared to Esav, who goes on to found the mighty Roman Empire, and we're still living in like the the final outcome of the Roman Empire. We have, maybe the American Empire is like the last embodiment of the ideals and the culture of Rome, where, Rome would go and conquer other nations and they would kind of bring them in and make them citizens of Rome. And I think America is the same way. America has fought in many wars and many bases, military bases of the U.S. empire. And then America sends out its culture, it sends out its movies and TV shows and music and just, it sends out its culture to all the world. And then anyone can come from any other nation. It can become an American, just like, in ancient Rome. So Asa was compared to the sun. We're in this gullus Edom. We're in this Roman exile. And Asa is very strong and bright. And that's the day right now. That's the gullus we're in. Then we're compared, Jacob is compared to the moon, and David HaMelech, King David's compared to the moon, because the Jewish people throughout thousands of years of history right now, we have kind of like, we're like a moon, sometimes it's waxing and waning, like sometimes we're great, like in the days of King David and Shlomo HaMelech, King David and King Solomon, when we have a Beis HaMikdash, we have a temple. And then sometimes, we go through downsides of history where, Esav, Rome's been very powerful. And B'ezrat Hashem, eventually we will break out of the cycle with the coming of Mashiach, and then, Yaakov will be elevated again, the moon will be full. I think there's like the Nevuah, like the moon will become as big as the sun, and then even the sun will become magnified 7 times. All very fascinating stuff. So, right, so something with disease, and I think it's really, Tiferes is like the Selam Elohim, it's like the image of a man, the Demus Adam, like the likeness of a man. And really, Hashem on his Kisei HaKavod, he has an image of Yaakov Avinu, of Jacob. When Hashem picked a person to represent all mankind, he picked Yaakov. And it's interesting, I think there's a midrash that said that Yaakov looked like Adam Arishon, he looked like Adam, the first man. They were similar. And so when Hashem says, this is what I want a man to be, it's Yaakov, it's Tiferes, it's Emes, it's truth. And this is really when we're not, unfortunately living up to that, and the Egyptians were corrupting what it means to be a man, what it means to be a person, that Hashem first, as a warning, sends the illness into the animal, and then chas v'shalom, if they don't get the message, then they will send illness into a person. Okay, so we're going to go to the next. We're going to jump up to the next Makkah, the next Sephirot. So here's very fascinating. So the Maharal says in Gevurot Hashem, he said something fascinating here. He said that this was the first Makkah that was really attached to the person. Even though like lice, and even though the frogs were jumping everywhere and croaking everywhere, and even jumping into people sometimes, jumping in their mouths and other places we don't talk about. But it was very irritating, and the lice were irritating. The lice were jumping on people and itchy. But here, the shekhin, the boils, was actually attached to the body. So this is attached to the body, and I think in some ways this makkah is the root of all. It's all like all illness, all disease. This is like the secret here of all illness, all disease, and all healing. And so Hashem sent this illness as the healing for this. Now, Gevurah is strength, power, self-control. So when we have good control, when we have good self-control, like we get to sleep at a reasonable time, we get a good night's sleep, we eat healthy, we eat 3 meals, we exercise a little bit, we're filling our days with good things, healthy things, learning Torah, doing mitzvos, doing gemilas chasadim, doing chesed, kindness for other people. Then, we're really like living a life of Gevurah, and we're healthy. But chas v'shalom, if our Gevurah breaks down, if our self-control breaks down, people go to places they shouldn't be, they start doing chas v'shalom aveiras, activities they shouldn't be doing, transgressing the Torah, it can lead to all kinds of illness and disease. So here we're going to see that the mamar associated with it is, it says, "But Yomer Elokim Naasa Adam B'Tsalm Menu Kidemus Senu," that a person's made in the Tselem Elokim, in the image of Hashem, in the likeness of Hashem. So when we act like Hashem, when we attach ourselves to Hashem, when we follow Hashem's mitzvos, when we learn His Torah, when we act like Hashem, we emulate Hashem, then we're going to be healthy. Then we're not going to have any problem with disease. And then it says, the yirdu b'dagasa yam, and you shall roll over the fish of the ocean, like Hashem's given us the fish. We can eat delicious, kosher fish. Ofa shamayim, and the birds of the heavens. We can, eat delicious, chicken and turkey and all that fun kosher birds. And we can use the feathers like for a quill, for writing, for an arrow. The scales, fish oil, so there's a lot of uses that Hashem's allowed us to use, these things. And the main thing is that for us to do this, we have to have a Selam Elohim. We have to, when we emulate Hashem, like our soul, the 10 Sephirot themselves are in the shape of a man. And when all these Sephirot are balanced, when we're truly acting like Hashem, then we can be free of illness, we can be healthy. And it's Yaakov, it's Yaakov Avinu when we act like Yaakov. And Gevurah here is associated with Yitzhak, with Isaac. Isaac had great Gevurah when I believe he was 37, when it was the Akedah. So when his father Abraham tied him up to offer him, he was a 37-year-old, strong, powerful young man, but he was willing to offer his life to Hashem because he knew that everything came from Hashem. So that's great Gevurah. And when we have Gevurah, when we have this kind of strength, then we can be free of disease. We have the strength to follow the mitzvos, the strength to sor meira, turn away from evil, to not do the Lotah says, to stay away from transgressing the negative mitzvahs. The mitzvahs tell us what not to do. And we have Gevurah to fulfill the negative mitzvahs, then we can have great health. That's really fascinating one there. So then the next, we're going to step up to Barad. Okay, and Barad is hail, but the Midrashim, they describe this hail as very wondrous. This hail was ice, with spheres of ice like hail is, but it had fire burning inside, and it was a great nace, it was a great miracle. This was above the, above the teva, above the natural world, above the laws of nature. So here, chesed, kindness, doing kindness for other people can get us to a great state of being above, Ma'ila min teva. The Torah, it said, it begins with chesed, it ends with chesed, and it's a tremendous thing. So here, the Maharal says is, Vayomer Elokim, I think it says, Tad she ha'aretz desha, Esa mazria zera. So here it's like the earth will be, it'll be vegetated, have all these, herbs and plants growing. And there'll be, and these plants can be used. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We're on Barad. I read the wrong one. I apologize. We are here on Barad, and that is Vayomer Elokim Yehi Rekia B'Sok Hamayim, that the Rekia will be in between the water, Vayhi Madil Bein Mayim Lamayim, and it will separate between the water and the water. All right, so this is a very deep concept for Chesed, and this, I was surprised that the Maharal put this here for Chesed. But he's saying like the Rekiim, according to the Rambam in Yesodei Torah, and he describes it some also in Moreh Nevuchim, the guide for the perplexed, he says that these Rekiim are these clear spheres, and then the planets and stars are put in these spheres, and these spheres themselves rotate. So for instance, the immediate sphere, the first sphere around the earth, is the moon. And very interestingly, his model is very different for the universe. So I think the next sphere contains, I believe it's Mercury, which is called Kochav, I believe, in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew. The next sphere containing, I believe, Venus or Noga, shining light. And then here's where it's really fascinating. The next sphere is actually the sun. And according to this model of the Rambam from Yesodei Torah, that the earth is actually in the center. Tola al blima, it's like the earth is supported only by the koach of Hashem, the power of Hashem, supported upon nothing. It falls, it doesn't fall because Hashem holds it there. And then the sun is actually orbiting around the earth. And then when you go out and out, and then you get to, the sphere of Jupiter, the sphere of Saturn. We'll talk about the three hidden spheres. We're going to talk about the seven lower and the three hidden very soon. And then I believe he said the eighth sphere is just all the fixed stars or all the stars, the galaxies. And then beyond that, I believe he said in the ninth sphere is all the mazalos, the special constellations that are associated with each month. It's a very, very deep concept, but the Rekia is making a separation between the waters and the waters. So our lowest Rekia is maybe separation, the atmosphere, the separation between the ocean and the moisture and the clouds. But then the next Rekia after that, between us and the moon, is a very fascinating concept, but we have the elements of physicality here, the Yesodos that are Gashmias, that are physical, and then a separation between the elements, the Yesodos that are Ruchnias, that are spiritual. So then the next step becomes the water, the physical water on earth, and then the spiritual water in the heavens, in Shemayim. And very fascinating. Okay, very deep subject. I don't know, just maybe touched a little bit. All right, so I mentioned the seven lower. So that's the seven lower spheros. Then we'll get to the three upper spheros. So the seven lower spheros are called the midos. They connect to emotion. When these spheros are used properly and balanced, like a person is using his emotions correctly, and then they should be guided by the three upper spheros, and the three highest spheros are related to machshava, the intellect, intelligence, thinking, the thought process. So we want to guide the emotions with we want to take the upper three spheros and use our mind to control our emotions, control the emotions, use all the lower emotions and the midos properly. And it's called correcting your midos, use them all properly. So now we're going to get into thought, the thought process. We're going to continue this journey. So the next plague, this is very fascinating. You wouldn't expect this, but here is Arba, the locust, and it's related to Bina. Bina is understanding. So it's the thought process of like you're trying to understand something. You go over it and over it. Maybe you learn something from a sefer, you learn something from your rebbe, you learn something from a teacher, and you just try to think about it. You're thinking about it, you're thinking about it, and then you start to get a grasp of it. You start to begin to make it like yours, where you really understand this concept now. It's not something that's just someone's teaching you, but you really understand this concept. And then when you start, then you can have the ability, once you make these concepts yours, you can start to put different concepts together, and you can come up even with new ways of thinking about things, new discoveries in thought, new ideas. And that's Bina. Now it seems strange. Okay, locust, how is that related to all this very deep one? So here the mamar is, according to the Maharal, Vayomer Elokim Tadshe Haaretz Desha Esav. Very interesting. So like bring out the growth, the plant growth, the grasses and herbs, the Esav, Mazria Zera, that they will produce, these herbs and plants will produce seed. So Eitz Pri Osa Pri. Now this is the full potential of the world. It's very fascinating that Hashem said that he wanted fruit trees that make fruit. And then when we see what the earth actually did, it's really fascinating. The earth just made trees that produce fruit. So what Chazal tells us, and in many Midrashim, is that in the future, in Yemotza Mashiach, in the days of Messiah, the days of the Mashiach, that the whole world will reach its full potential. So right now we have trees that don't produce fruit. I think, for instance, like a pine tree, I think it produces pine cones, but there's no pine fruit. But in the future, when everything reaches its full potential and the earth itself will reach its full potential, even trees that don't give off fruit now will give off fruit. And then the Midrashim say that and then every part of the tree will taste like the fruit. So if you ate a leaf or the bark from a tree, so in the future, an orange leaf is going to taste like the orange, and the orange bark, the bark of the orange tree will taste like an orange, and like an apple tree, the leaf will taste like an apple. But I think they say now that the only tree that maybe has this capability is the Esrog, which is fascinating. And so here we're talking about potential, and we're talking about growth and fruit. And here is like intellectual growth, intellectual fruit, like working on ideas and learning, and then your mind blossoms with, like, your intellect blossoms with all kinds of ideas and new fruit, and then reaching the ultimate potential. And this is like understanding the great secrets, the depth of the Torah, understanding halacha, understanding, Mishnah, Gemara, just all the levels of the Torah, and just being able to produce chidushim, like new concepts in the Torah, and just intellectual fruit. Very, very amazing stuff. Now, the Arba, the locust, came and they ate the crops, and it was kind of showing the Egyptians like they were misusing the world. They were, in their minds, they were misusing their thought process. The Egyptians put, instead of the Torah, like they were masters of kishuf. They were masters of sorcery. Now sorcery and magic is kind of spiritual hacking. They use the dark, evil, like negative spiritual forces, but brought about by doing the opposite of mitzvahs, doing averos, and they tap into, like a spiritual hacker, they tap into this dark spiritual energy called Tuma, and then they do their sorcery, and they do, their magic. And like Hashem was showing them by the locusts eating up all their crops, you're misusing it. You're misusing your intellect, focusing on this. And it says, why is it called Kishuf? Like the Gemara asked the question, why is it called Kishuf? It says, Mechashim, Mechashef, Shel Palmalia, Shel Mila. They reject the heavenly family, meaning the sorcerers reject that really Hashem's the source of everything, and his legions of angels, that Hashem sends the influence to do, things in creation, and that the sorcerer himself wants to be all powerful. So Hashem's showing them a sign: you're misusing your intellect, you're misusing your intelligence, and you should be using these spheros. You should be using, these spheros to draw down kedusha and tahara, the positive spiritual energy, like the good, the light side of the force, the good spiritual energy coming from Hashem. Okay, so then we'll jump up to Chakma, and this one's a pretty easy one. Like Chakma's wisdom, and the plague, the Makkah, was Koshak, was darkness, and this is very fascinating. So it says, Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or Vayehi Or. So Hashem says, "Let there be light." This is a very simple one to make the connection. They were using, their wisdom was dark, sorceress, against the Ratzon of Hashem, not what Hashem wanted. Hashem wants, people to be learning Torah. Torah is called the Torah Or, I think it's in Mishlei or Koheles. I forgot which one right now, but it's like Ner Mitzvah, Torah Or. Each mitzvah is a candlelight, and the Torah itself is this great, great source of light. The Torah is Or, the Torah is light. So the light of the Torah, and I think everyone can kind of relate to this concept. Like when you get an idea, you get that flash of inspiration. That's Chakma. That's the light. And then when you're struggling to understand something, and you can't understand a topic or subject, and you're just in darkness, or where you don't have clarity of like how to live your life, your thought process. Like sometimes we get so biased sometimes. We don't have that clarity of the Torah. We don't have that clear lens of the Torah to look through. And we just feel like we're walking around in darkness. Like Kasilim, fools are compared to like living their lives in darkness, always bumping into things, always chas v'shalom doing averas, because they don't have the light of the Torah to guide them. And the mitzvos are like lights, lighting up our path, lighting up the Derech Hashem, leading us to Olam Haba. And the great Or, the great light of the Torah, the Chakma, the wisdom of the Torah. And then Hashem sent the darkness to to correct that, how the Egyptians were misusing their intellect, misusing their thought process. Okay, so finally we go up to the top, the Keser. Now, just as Malchus was called the lower crown, Keser is called the highest crown. This is the highest aspect of Hashem. It's Hashem alone, Hashem Echad. Hashem's created everything. Hashem's the source of all life, and Hashem controls life and death. So here it's very easy to see. Unfortunately, the Makos here is the plague, the Makos Bechuros, the death of the firstborn. Now, the firstborn is also a Reishis. He's the first in the family. But a Bechor has to have the humility that a Bechor is second to Hashem. The Bechor can be the firstborn in the family, but the Bechor is second to Hashem. And I heard this amazing Shir Day. I believe it's Rabbi Ephraim Eliyahu Shapiro. He's bringing this beautiful concept that Hashem is Echad. He's the Aleph. He's one. So in the ones column, what's the next letter? It's the Beis. It's the Beis is the next letter, and that's the first letter of Bechor. Then Hashem, his holy name begins with the Yud, Yud He Vav He. So in the tens column, what's the second in the tens column? The second letter in the tens column is the Kaf, which is 20. So we get the Kaf. And then in the hundreds column, what's 100 in Gematria? It's Kuf, Kodesh. That Hashem is the Kodesh. Hashem is Kodesh. We want to be Kadoshim, so we follow in Hashem's ways. We take the second letter in the hundreds column. It's the Reish, which is 200. And we can be the Bechor. We can all tap into the power of the Bechor. And may we see, Mashiach ben Yosef soon. The Bechor Shor, Bechor Shoro Chadar Lo. The Hashem will create, from Ephraim, the Mashiach ben Yosef. He'll be the Bechor of Hashem. He'll lead us all. And he'll be the leader, the Rosh of the Jewish people, the first king, and then followed by Mashiach ben David. And here, Hashem is the Reishis. Hashem is the beginning of everything. And the very first thing, the very first Mamar is Bereshis Baro Elokim. Eis Hashemayim ve'Eis Haaretz. That on day one, Hashem is first. He creates everything. He creates the heavens and the earth. He creates all the potential for everything that will exist. And Hashem is the Reshis. And then he says that we can be the Reshis. That Yaakov, that the Jewish people, Yaakov, he says, is his Bechor. We can be Hashem's Bechorim. We can be Hashem's Reshis. Okay, so this is Keser. Hashem now has cleared out all of Mitzrayim. He's done a tikkun. He's masakened all the kilkulim, all the destruction that the Egyptians had done on the Maisa Breshis, on creation. They've done all this damage with their sorcery. Now Hashem's fixed it all. And then after this last Makkah, after this last plague, everything's fixed. And now it's Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now we can leave. And then we can start elevating ourselves to receive the Torah. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see everyone back again soon on Sweet and Good Torah.